It seems to me I have a few problems. The first problem is that I'm the speaker after lunch, which means in my experience most people go to sleep or lose interest. The second problem is I'm speaking in English, which is always a bad thing to do in a foreign country. And thirdly, probably the worst problem is it seems to me that most of the previous speakers have actually done most of my speaking for me already. So my aim today, this afternoon, is to actually try and catch up on the time. So I thought what we'd do to start off with is the basis of this talk was to talk about our use of essential oils in the United Kingdom. Probably to start off with, it's a very good idea to let you know the difference in the practices and what our practice is from the point of view of being a vet in the United Kingdom. I've just spent a day seeing some excellent Polish veterinary practices, and I must admit there's a whole range of things I need to sort out when I get home and change certain practices that we do. And it's quite clear that there's a considerable difference between what happens here and what happens back in England. The practice is, in England there's probably only about 5 poultry veterinary practices, and there will be 2 major ones, one of which is ourselves, and another practice that does a lot more broilers than we do. So in total, there's probably only about 20 vets actually working with poultry for probably a slightly larger poultry industry. This means that a lot of farms don't get seen very regularly. And I think the position of the vet in Poland seems to me to be a lot more important than what it is in England, and it would be very nice if I could persuade my clients to listen to me. It would be a lot easier to introduce essential oils if they listen to me. So that's my problems. If we talk about St. David's, St. David's is the veterinary practice. Basically, we started in the south of England, just down here in Exeter. Started with poultry probably in about 1975. I joined the practice in 1983, and really started to do more poultry from about 1990. We have basically opened up a whole range of practices across the country. We are very much field-based practice, so we go and see clients. Our opposition practice tends to be more of a retail, wholesale practice, I would say. They have less vets and see more chickens, which is interesting. So we have basically various bases across the country, and a few years ago we started in Ireland, and Ireland's great fun. Lots of Guinness, lots of drinking, and some very small farms which need a lot of help. It's a great place to go to. So what I thought I would do to start off with was to really just go through some of the basic disease situation at home. Overall disease is actually extremely low. It's extremely boring, really. Most of our problems are husbandry-related problems, and there's very little actual clinical disease. We have seen a big uptake in biomass systems on broiler farms. That has resulted, and because of the payment systems which the government have in place, the farmers are now highly encouraged to have their heating on continuously. The more they heat the house, the more money they get from the government, which is a lovely situation. The problem being, however, that we're now getting to situations where the humidity is in some houses dropping to 15 to 20% in the first 4 to 5 days. The other effect of all this biomass has been that there is less signs of enteritis. Probably the damage is still, in fact, the damage is still going on. There is still the coccidiosis, there's still dysbacteriosis in the birds, but because the houses are so dry and there's so much ventilation being used, it's a lot less visible to the farm manager, which does mean that we have to go out and find the disease to prove that there's a problem. The coccidiosis would still be the major issue. As Vangeta said, you have to go and see the birds. In our experience, most of the lesions are very minor, but they are enough in the most of our clients who have Ross 308 birds, There was some cob birds, and I personally think, and I hope Avigen aren't in the room, I personally think this bird is extremely sensitive to any stresses. It seems to me that when you look at some of the coccidial lesions, they're quite minor, but the effect on the bird is quite extreme. And so what we're seeing is this apparent failure of retroperistalsis, and you are having, as you probably know, if you introduce radioactive chromium into the rectum or the cloaca of a bird, it will appear in the gizzard within about 50 minutes. And therefore, retroperistalsis is extremely important. This is controlled by the gizzard, and we personally think that some of these minor or less severe coccidial lesions are enough to disrupt this retroperistalsis, leading to rapid food passage and undigested food appearing in the litter. So coccidiosis is the big issue. Vangela said, why is it occurring? I would agree with him entirely. There's a whole range of feed-related problems, although to be fair, the food recently has been a lot better than it was 2 years ago. We certainly had a lot of mycotoxin problems which were undiagnosed, and we had some very, very poor quality wheat. This year, the food has been a lot better. I think the problem is much more likely to be a beginning of a failure of the coccidiostats. Traditionally, the coccidial program in the UK has been Maxiban or nicarbazine narracin mixture, as you know, till 21 days, or around about 21 days of age in a broiler, and then a transfer onto an ionophore. And that's been a traditional picture. Most other chemical anticoccidials show complete resistance. And we recently had a client, for example, go on to diclazuril, and in the feed, and within one cycle he had major maxima, probably Eimeria maxima. So the two things we're seeing is a cervulina and Eimeria maxima, and probably both of them, with the amount of biomass that's being used, would be difficult to pick up unless you actually start looking at birds and looking at production figures. We've had recently some ILT cases in broilers. This is really, it's on the same farm. It's happened 3 times in a row, 500,000 birds, very good farm. But he has a pullet rearer nearby. In England, we don't use ILT in the broiler breeders. We use ILT vaccine in layers. And I think this has just been a simple reaction. Of course, in Northern Ireland, we had a massive ILT outbreak. So far, I think there's been 25 farms. We've had to slaughter broiler breeders and broilers in Northern Ireland. This is because there was no vaccine used at all in Northern Ireland, and then somebody decided to import some eggs from Scotland, and probably they brought the ILT with them. So ILT has been a little bit of a problem. Then we move into a sort of range of issues which are new to me in broilers and are causing quite a few problems. Lameness and reovirus, which I'll talk about in a moment, and in particular also heart valve lesions. I was talking to a vet this morning, and he was saying that Enterococcus seems to be more and more prevalent, and I would agree entirely. We just seem to find heart valve lesions, infective arthritis, all over the place, starting sometimes from 7 days of age. And it's quite extraordinary the size of the valvular endocarditis you see at about 7 days of age. So that's a new condition to us, really. I don't think we missed it in the past. I just think it is completely new. Gizzard erosion, some quite severe gizzard erosion I'll talk about. That's causing problems in Ireland, and a little bit of a problem in the UK or in England. So we'll look at those as well before we talk about essential oils. So this is the sort of classic situation I'm seeing with broilers. The problem is occurring at around about 19 days of age, 18 to 19 days of age, sometimes a little bit earlier. And you start to suspect that the birds aren't moving as fast as they should do. You go into the house, they've often very well grown. I mean, these birds were well over they were about 1 kilo at 20 days. They were Ross 308s. They looked fine, very, very even. No early mortality. And then you started to think, well, these birds aren't moving away from me as fast as they should do. They're just, they walk and sit, walk and sit. And when you looked at them more closely, and this picture is a little bit extreme, there was just generally this mild bruising blue-green colour on the hocks. On bacteriology, we found absolutely nothing. So these birds actually came from breeder flocks that hadn't had any reovirus vaccine. Some companies use reovirus in their broiler breeders, others don't. And we're not very keen on reovirus. We don't really diagnose it very often as a problem, as compared to some other countries. And so we sent samples for virus isolation, and we found absolutely no reovirus or anything else on virus isolation for this as well. And this problem continued. I haven't got an answer to it. It's a bit like your previous speaker who had lots of problems with undiagnosed cases. This one really, after the parent flock were about 40 weeks of age, the problem went away altogether. But we were getting to a situation where mortality and culling, it was mainly culling because there was no deaths in these birds, but the culling was up to sort of 15 to 20%, which is quite horrific. So maybe that was a failure of my diagnosis, but that was one situation which luckily has gone away, so I can forget about it for the moment. This is the classical picture of endocarditis. I'm sad to say that probably 90% of the UK broiler industry starts on starter medication. For most companies, they've been using products like lincospectin regularly at quite high doses. So lincospectin would be used at around about 150 milligrams per kilogram and used for the first 3 days at least. And this has been going on for decades, really. Bacterial sensitivity, resistance is not particularly a problem. There is starting to become more E. coli resistance to lincospectin. So the birds start on that sort of product. And we are seeing this coming through on quite a regular basis. Once again, I think there is a hatchery involvement, but there's been various hatcheries, various parent codes. And if you don't get heart valve lesions, you end up with septic arthritis, usually involving the stifle or the hock. Treatment is a complete waste of time. And what's worrying me is that we probably didn't look at enough hearts in the past, so maybe there was more of this present and we just missed it. We grow usually a mixture of, well, you can get E. coli out of them, you certainly get Enterococcus of various types, and sometimes Staphylococcus in there as well. What I don't understand, it seems that there is some predilection, whether there's a problem with eggs or floor eggs or something like that in the breeders, but it doesn't really tie together. So I'm afraid it's another one of my problems, which I'm not really have a clear answer to, but it's certainly what we're seeing a lot more of it. You begin to realise I don't make a diagnosis. A diagnosis once a month, I think, is quite a good success for most vets. Anybody who says they do that more than that, they're making the stories up, as far as I'm concerned, or they don't look closely enough. Then we have gizzard erosion. So this has been going on for a little while. Certainly, probably for the last 2 years, fowl adenovirus 1, FAV1, is fairly well linked into it, and often on histology that's what we come up with. So I think I can say we do get a diagnosis with this. However, recently we've started to see quite a lot of cases, problems starting at around about 12 days of age. And from then onwards, the birds just stop growing. They stop entirely for about 4 days. So you end up with a flock that is very, very uneven. Mortality is not significant, but you occasionally get the sort of black scour with bleeding into the gizzard. And we are using Tylan and Salivet on this with some success, I suppose. I don't understand why the use of an aspirin or a salicylic acid would be a good thing to do in a bird with a gizzard erosion, but it's certainly our clients solidly believe that the use of Salivet in these cases improves the flocks that we treat. We've looked for mycotoxins, we've looked for various other alkaloids and problems. We don't have any. This problem's occurring in Ireland where there's no fish meal being used. We also have the odd avian nephritis virus in Ireland. So this is sort of becoming a greater problem. We started to see this in broiler breeders as well, which worries me quite a lot. Broiler breeders in rear. So there's obviously something appearing in the breeding pyramid, I would think, and it would worry me where that went by the time it got down to the broilers. So that's the sort of range of conditions, but most of the time it's coccidiosis. About 4 years ago, everything seemed to happen 4 years ago here, as far as I can tell. I came here and I was suggested I met a Polish vet at the European Poultry Study Group, and he said I ought to go to Poland. I thought it was a good idea. Why not? Come out and see what's going on. And I was very impressed by the use of essential oils, and I couldn't work out how this was being done, because in England it's only madmen and monks who use essential oils and herbal products, and they wear sandals and have long beards. You don't do it really. It's just traditionally not the right thing to do. And so I thought, well, it's a good challenge, because if I'm running one of the biggest practices in the country, why not actually see if we can break this tradition? And the fact that it was being used successfully in Poland and Germany seemed to me a good reason to sort of introduce it into England. So if we start, it's been quite a long battle, really. Andres here thinks I should be working harder and doing a lot more selling, but he doesn't have to deal with my clients and the whole attitude there. So I thought I'd just go through some of the problems and the positive sides, of course, because otherwise it all becomes rather negative. First of all, the image of the product. As I say, the idea that you're using herbs. It's only one step away from homeopathy, which we all know is total madness according to the UK broiler industry. So that is a problem. I think previous client experience, the trouble is that it hasn't been properly used in England, and we'll talk about that as well in a moment. Trying to deal with scientific data has been fun. The attitude of my competitors, they're very keen to point out that I'm a complete madman, and so that you shouldn't be doing it, Richard, and the farmers as well. And then we can talk about the real big problem, which is the supermarkets. So if we go through this in stages, I don't know if you can see that top picture, but this is the general idea that to use herbal products, you must live in a monastery. And it's been quite hard to actually get the idea across to the industry that no, this is done properly. It's made in a proper factory with proper controls and good manufacturing practice. And I think that's been a battle which we're now slowly winning. So that was the first sort of area of concern. I think the competitors in the market, there aren't any real essential oil competitors to BioPoint in the UK. Well, if there are, they're not very well organised. However, they are the ones that are out there are sort of arriving in their white van, selling the product and driving away as fast as they possibly can, after promising the earth, really, to the farmers. So there's a difficulty really in persuading people that the real product done properly will work. And this is what we had to sort of spend quite a long time working on. I think our industry, probably like yours, is determined everything has to be done by scientific data. If it hasn't got an EU license and it's not been fully tested on thousands of animals, and it hasn't got a portfolio file about a mile thick, then it can't be a proper product. And that certainly has been a problem to get the story over to people about what's going on with it. I think we're actually winning with that now, because as the experience of using these products has increased on the marketplace, people begin to realise that it's probably better not to have lots of testing going on. It's a different attitude of vets in England. We hate each other, really. We're very competitive. We don't like to talk to each other if we can help it. And I think there's not enough veterinary practices, and there's therefore a sort of attitude. I try to introduce some of the less competitive practices. You try to introduce the idea to them, and they just, they want to see evidence, and they want to see data, and they want to see all the protocols written out, and they want to see probably a university to back it up with lots of impartial advice. So that's been very difficult. As I say, I think some of the vets have tried to use essential oils, and they've had some averagely poor experiences, maybe. I'm very cynical, and I do apologize to anybody in the room, various professors in the room, but I think in my country now, most of the universities are fully funded by the pharmaceutical companies, and therefore they're not really interested in doing too much of this sort of work, and that's a definite issue. I do, when I see the young vets that we now employ, very good vets, very keen, they think I'm even more mad than my clients do. Because at the end of the day, they've had one source of information. It's been basically pharmaceutical, conventional route. And anything else must be slightly strange. And then, of course, you go on to the continuing professional development training at home, and most of that is also funded one way or other by the conventional industry. So there's a lot of negative things which tends to play onto the vets. We have a lot of farm auditing. I expect you do as well. We have a lot of problems with supermarkets demanding very high standards, and they also want to see lots of paperwork. I made the mistake of trying to sell BioStop to small backyard chicken. I thought it was a good idea. We have a website called Chicken Vet, which is designed for the people with 3 chickens, or 4 maybe, and who are a complete pain in the backside. But they're very keen to look after their pet chickens. And because I put on the website that this was a product which would help in the control of diarrhea, I had the regulatory authority onto me saying I couldn't say that. I was making a medicinal claim. So regulatory and farm auditing has been a bit of a problem. And I suppose there is some degree of liability and professional indemnity insurance situations. I won't go into this too many times. I mean, I think at the present moment it's very interesting, and we were discussing this in the car earlier, that at the present moment the amount of essential oils used in the UK market are not a real threat to the pharmaceutical companies. But I can see as they become more used, the pressure will mount to get them licensed or get them tested in some different way. And I think I know exactly where that argument's going to come from. So there might be a situation where we actually don't want to expand it too much, but I don't want to tell BioPoint that necessarily. And I think also you have a situation where the consumer is really confused as to what they're really buying. So that's all the negatives, and I think that just means you need a bigger challenge, really. The positive sides. We are really under extreme pressure to reduce antibiotics, like everybody else. The UK broiler figure is now running at about 12 milligrams per kilogram of meat produced. It's a rather strange figure, I must admit, to combine together all the antibiotics into one group. We are not allowed to use enrofloxacin. That's banned not by the regulators, but by the supermarkets. Tesco's in particular will not allow you to use it at all. And we're under continual pressure to both on the egg industry. The latest thing is I now have to report to the major egg packers what the amount of antibiotics are used in the eggs egg layers under my care. So I think we have a great positive use for essential oils where we can actually reduce the use of some of these antibiotics, and more importantly, probably work towards reducing some of the resistance problems that are now developing. When it comes to dysbacteriosis, we certainly were getting more and more problems of failure of treatment. Conventional therapy wasn't working. You were, instead of just using one treatment of amoxicillin, you were using 2 or 3. And so we had to make a change and go in a slightly different route. I think it's been very good, really, that our practice has taken on this oval approach. People don't understand it because obviously they think that the vet has complete control over antibiotics but doesn't have any control over essential oils, and therefore they think I'm playing a very risky game, that I'll reduce the antibiotics which I sell and not increase my income from somewhere else. But that's been good for the image of the business, really. I think there's lack of real disease. I mean, I listened to Jim, and what he says is absolutely correct. But when you get into some situations, and maybe some of you have, where you're working in the Middle East, you can have as much disinfectants and biosecurity as you like, but the birds will still die, and they die extraordinarily successfully. I deal in a situation in Saudi Arabia with low-path AI, and low-path is killing 50% of the flocks. So that's not very low-path as far as I can work out. So I think we do have a lack of real disease here, which really gives us an opportunity to get these products in as well. And I think its image is also very important. It's a very good quality product. So all I wanted to do, because you are the experts on this, you've been using it a lot longer than me. It's a bit embarrassing me standing in front of you, really, because you've used more essential oils than I have. So I thought I would just go through quickly what we actually are really using. The starting point for us and for most of the industry was probably oregano mixes. About 5 years ago, there was no antibiotics with a zero egg withdrawal in layers at all. And we had quite a lot of blackhead problems, and we also had E. coli, normal E. coli peritonitis. At that stage, if we imported antibiotics from another country under an import certificate, we had to put 7 days egg withdrawal on it, so even if they had a zero egg withdrawal somewhere else. So we were in a very difficult situation. So we started to use oregano. As it happens, since then we can now import oxytetracycline. It's quite funny, actually. In England, oxytetracycline has been banned, the English version, because they found residues in eggs, but I can import Spanish oxytetracycline and still use it with a zero egg, so I don't quite understand the difference. So we've used oregano, and that's been reasonably successful, I would say. So that was the sort of first product we really went into. And I think I don't need to go through this in too much detail. As I say, we tend to use it now either in combination with antibiotics or following on from antibiotics. One of the biggest problems we're seeing, and I don't know whether you are, is that in the new colony houses, there's a lot of dysbacteriosis, really. It's mainly coccidia-based. All our colony house birds are reared, obviously, in cages and then transferred at 16 weeks. We don't use anti-coccidial vaccines for birds reared in cages. They don't have any problems with coccidiosis. But they move into these colonies, which in my view are no more than big indoor free-range sheds now, where they have scratch pads, they have access to feces, and usually around about 20 weeks of age, we start to see dysbacteriosis, or we see, at worst, necrotrix, Eimeria necrotrix. So the big sheds are having some really big problems, and this is where we've really started to use Viovit in a big way. I'm told I should be using Coxlin, and probably after today's meeting I will go and try that. But that's where we've been doing it, to try and control some of the sort of gut bacterial infections in layers. Going back a bit, the real issue, I suppose, where we've found essential oils to be extremely useful is in the control of this sort of rapid food passage. I think we all know the general scenario. We know that the food is going through in sort of one peristalsis rather than going backwards and forwards. And the first stage is to see this disruption. I think stress plays a big role in this. Change of food, nothing wrong with the second batch of food, but just a change of food, a change in lighting program. Any changes now with some of these birds we're dealing with, we regularly get very high results. I mean, our results would be at 38 days, a 2.6 kilo bird at about a 1.54 FCR. And that bird, if you do anything to upset it, if you look at it slightly strangely, it'll pass food too rapidly. So this is where we first started to try and control it. And the first stage of that was using Biostop. And this has actually been extremely successful for us. We use the product for about 3 days. Sometimes we use it with amoxicillin, often we don't, and it depends on the how good the farmer is. And as long as he can observe things early on, we'll get in with this and often solve the problem. I'm sure you've all seen similar successes. And we use a standard dose rate of 500 mils per 1,000 litres for 12 hours. I probably sell it quite expensively in England, but it's still half the price or less than amoxicillin treatment. This has been a very good way, as you know, to reduce antibiotic usage because most of the antibiotics we use are entirely related to dysbacteriosis. It's allowed us to focus the farmer's mind on looking at the feces early on and to try and actually then work out what is affecting this gut passage. You know, what change is actually happening and why are these birds reacting? It reduces the cost of treatment, and also because it's not on prescription. We employ fieldsmen as well. Who are very well trained as farm managers, and they will go out to some of the farms for us, and they can observe rapid food passage. They can supply or take with them the biostock. By accident, I was dealing with some of the swollen joints, and I had flocks of lame birds, and we had some houses which we wanted to treat. They were about 18 days old. I hadn't really noticed that the litter was a bit worse, a little bit wetter in all the houses than the non-lame bird houses, and so I decided to treat them with Thailand. I can't remember the reason why, but we was treating them with Thailand. But as an experiment, half the houses we put onto Salivet. I thought it could do no harm. It would, help in the pain of the lameness, and it wasn't very expensive. And why not give it a go? And what we've discovered was, when I went back to see the birds about a week later, the farmer was, happy-ish. The lameness was as good as it was going to be because a lot of these birds had pus in the joints. But what the most significant factor was that the litter had improved considerably on the houses that had the Salivet. And I don't necessarily understand that exactly. I think I'll come back onto this in a moment, I think part of the problem with dysbacteriosis, when you look at it, you're seeing an inflamed intestine, and some of that inflammation is really leading to the tight junctions leaking. I think probably part of our Enterococcus problem is leakage through the tight junctions which are joining the enterocytes together. And one of the things that aspirin is likely, or salicylic acid is likely to do, is to stop this or reduce this inflammation. We don't exactly know the mechanisms which are causing these tight junctions to loosen up, but as they loosen, rather than allowing just nutrients and water to be absorbed through them, they allow bacterial invasion. So is some of these lameness problems we're seeing, is some of this enterococcal problems more due to overheating chicks, or is there some other stress which is causing this to open up? Very interestingly, as well as using Salivet, we have started to use Lactobacillus farcimensis. Lactobacillus farcimensis, which you might use here, I don't know, produces nitric oxide. And that nitric oxide blocks the enzymes which just loosen these tight junctions, and is now one of the treatments, I believe, for irritable bowel syndrome in humans. So we're quite keen to sort of make a mixture using some Salivet to take maybe some of the inflammation away, and also the use of probiotics at the same time. Where else are we using Salivet? Well, as I say, we've used it with lameness. This sort of gizzard erosion, we all see feed flicking when the birds select the wheat from the ration. And if you can't see any signs of coccidia, which is usually, I would say, coccidia is the most common thing to see with food flicking, we see gizzard erosion. And in those cases, strangely, Salivet seems to have improved the birds. You would think giving an aspirin to a bird with an eroded gizzard would be the worst thing to do, but it seems to have a good positive effect. And I've talked about tight junctions. So the final thing was what we did is we decided to try and put together a schedule of ways. Because we don't have as many vets as maybe you do, we're further away from our clients, and our clients don't like to spend the money to see us. We try and come up with a non-antibiotic approach which would allow the farmer to try and control dysbacteriosis early. I think there's problems with this now, because with the amount of coccidiosis that's going on, we need to probably change this. This was designed when we weren't seeing so much coccidia. And basically, it's a sort of 3-stage program. And when there's the first stage, the box is fully labeled up with all the instructions and pictures of different feces. I spend my whole life looking at chicken shit. I think it's very sad, really. I'm not sure how the interpreter just actually translated that either. So the first stage is rapid gut passage, which we talked about, and we advise the use of BioStop at that point. If that doesn't recover, we then tell the farmer to continue the treatment and to use Salivet as well. And then if there's no recovery, then we've got to do, within about 48 hours, if we don't see an improvement, we then have to just go and visit the farm and talk about the use of antibiotics or do more investigations. So this was a sort of way of putting together the whole essential oils into a more easily understandable package for the farmer. So in summary, and I don't know how the time is going, but I'm going to stop anyhow. It's been quite a difficult thing to introduce essential oils into the UK market. The customers and their customers have been quite cynical and don't believe it, but slowly but surely they are believing it. Luckily, my colleagues who work with us now also believe it. I think we need to do a lot of client education. And but overall, as I say at the end there, it's probably better to lead than to follow. So I think it's a good way forward. And thank you very much for your time.